All right, we're back with part two. We're going to skip to the end. We're going to pick up with coordinate versus coeducational. I think perhaps I rushed through some of that. But basically, the idea of the coordinate education was where you had women's colleges that were alongside the men's colleges. One of the interesting things is that the Sophie Newcomb College at Tulane University, if you do a search in the Chronicle of Higher Education, it wasn't too terribly long ago that the foundation that started Sophie Newcomb was part of a court battle where Tulane University basically wanted to take that over and just fold that college into their university. Now, they were successful, but only after a protracted legal battle. There were a number of alums, Sophie Newcomb alums, who were adamantly opposed to the idea that that college would be folded into Tulane University. A number of women who had attended Sophie Newcomb believed very strongly that their identity as graduates of Sophie Newcomb, an all-women's college, was distinct, separate from, and in some cases better than the education at Tulane University. So that's just an interesting part of coordinate education versus coeducational programs. Pembroke at Brown University. Pembroke was the women's college. At Tufts University, you had Jackson College for the women. And then at Western Reserve University, you had Flora Stone Mather College for the women. And that was part of the coordinate versus the coeducational approach. In the East, in the Northeast, or New England, it was Cornell that led the way in becoming coeducational. The idea of, or the coeducational movement was strongest and earliest out in the West. Now, when we say out West, it's what we think of today as the Midwest, Iowa, Wisconsin, etc. Because, of course, in that day and time, that's what was considered out west. Today we would think of west as California. The institutions in the Northeast and the South hung on to their traditions as single-sex campuses for a long, long time. In 1872, there were 97 major coeducational colleges in the U.S. 67 of them were in the West, 17 were in the South, 8 were in the Mid-Atlantic states, and 5 were in New England. So you see very clearly that the coeducational movement really started out West. And it's interesting because out West is where you had folks moving, conquering new land, and we see the folks back East holding on to their traditions because they had started their colleges before America had earned its independence, long before the Civil War. And so that's where we see these traditions that had become embedded, and so change was much more difficult. So it's also a sociological thing, a societal, cultural difference. The institutions out West were younger, and as a result, more amenable to change, more responsive to the realities of their location and their population's needs. So that was an interesting part of that particular movement. By 1880, 30% of American colleges did admit women. By 1900, 71% of American colleges admitted women. Now, also the meaning of coeducational grew and changed over the years. In 1870, the University of Michigan had 1 woman to every 429 men. If you're a young woman going off to find the man of your dreams, I suppose those are good odds. For the guys, not so much. But then again, college in that day and time was seen as damaging to women's marital aspirations. So that was an interesting twist as well. But those ratios, 1 to 429 at University of Michigan, was in 1870. By 1898, there were 588 women and 745 men at the University of Michigan. And you see that type of gender breakdown continue. In fact, Stanford University, after a few years, actually put a policy in place to limit the number of women enrolling because they did not want to change the male-dominated culture. And so it's very interesting that while they were open to these new ideas, they didn't necessarily want to change how they did things. Today, the typical gender breakdown is 60% female to 40% male. So you see it's definitely flip-flopped in the last 200 years. In fact, the number of graduates, women graduate at almost twice the rate of men. When you go to a typical graduation ceremony, you'll see a lot more women in the among the graduates than you will men, even though men still occupy the larger share, or the lion's share, of power positions in America, both public and private, in the public and private sectors. But as far as college goes, women have definitely not only taken on the battle, but they've won the battle, guys. We have to be honest. They have taken over, and they have seized their opportunity, and now women are outperforming men by leaps and bounds. Now, why at that particular point in time were there more women than men? Were there more men, than women in higher education, even though the opportunities were opening up for women? First of all, the number of women increased because there were more women than men graduating from high school. Men tended to drop out of high school and work on the family farm as a matter of necessity. But those who did graduate from high school went to college at higher rates than the women. So that's why the number of women in colleges and universities surpassed that. The number of men surpassed the number of women. So it's an odd kind of dichotomy. You had more women graduating from high school, but you had more men going to college at that point in time. We're talking about the late 19th century, early 20th century. And lastly, it's interesting that after the Civil War, really all the way through World War II, and even after that, women going to college, it was really seen as damaging to their marital prospects. And so that was another reason why women didn't go to college. Some women from wealthy families were sent to college simply out of a sense of duty or obligation, with wealthy fathers thinking, well, she's just going to be married, but she needs to be learned and cultured, so I'll send her to college. But it wasn't career based. The idea was not so they could go and build a career. And furthermore, the women who did go to college were by and large relegated to female-dominated careers, such as teaching and nursing. So by and large, while the opportunities for women were increasing in higher education, their opportunities in the workforce were not. In fact, it wasn't until 15, 20, 30 years ago that we started to see the demise of programs like secretarial science. In community colleges, we actually still have administrative assistant courses and programs that are heavily female in their enrollment. So there's still work to be done. There's still progress that needs to be made. But that's basically what happened after college for women. While the opportunities in college were opening up, the opportunities in the workforce were a lot slower to open up to women. All right, that was women in higher education, American women in higher education, in a very small nutshell. There are books written about women in higher education, and I would encourage you to check those out because it's a fascinating topic. The fact of the matter is, women had to overcome a number of barriers to get to where they are today, and it doesn't speak well of men. And as far as the laggardly pace at which we embraced women in higher education. That was an odd thing. Now, the question that's out on the discussion question for this week, because here at Wayland we do want to integrate faith and reason, faith and learning, I put a somewhat controversial question out there. The Apostle Paul talks about women should be silent in the church. And so I want you to start thinking about the idea, or Apostle Paul talking about women being silent versus the freedom and the opportunities that women have to get educated. And how do you reconcile those two? And how do you stay true to the Bible while allowing opportunities for women educationally and in the workforce? So we're going to talk a little bit about gender roles. Once again, I'll remind you, our discussions do need to stay civil, but it's okay to have a spirited discussion. And remember, if I put something out on the discussion board, it doesn't necessarily mean that I believe in it. I often take a devil's advocate position just to get people talking and get people thinking. So don't be afraid to engage that. I'm hoping it'll be a fun topic for us.